This video is sponsored by Babble. Hey everyone, Karsten here. Venom is the gas station energy drink of movies. It's vile, unappealing, and its fans are most likely sitting at home watching reruns of ridiculousness. Yet there's something about these movies that really stuck with people. I see people talking about it on Twitter and YouTube pretty consistently. I mean, part of that has to do with the fact that they just put out a new Venom, but still, something about it sticks. And that's more than you can say about a lot of superhero films. And so it's always been sort of interesting to me, these movies, but I've never actually sat down and bitten the bullet and watched either film. That is, until last month. I have nothing against superhero films or their fandoms, but I do think Venom is doing things a little bit differently, and that's why it's worth talking about. Because I kind of enjoyed myself, and I want to take the time to talk about why Venom and its sequel are so terrible in a good way that's promising for superhero films. Something like that. But let's talk about Venom. But before we do, guys, I'm Swedish. I mean, have you seen my name? And I've always wanted to lean into my Swedish roots and learn the language, but it's always felt a little intimidating. That is until Babble. Babble is a popular language learning app that actually works. See, I've always tried to lean into the whole learning a new language thing, specifically with Swedish, and I always kind of get lost or my interest fizzles out. I don't feel like I'm actually learning anything. But I've been doing Babble for like a week now, and I can safely say it's effective. For one, they teach language for real life situations. They don't just teach random words or things that you don't feel like you'll ever need to know. They teach things that they know you'll need to know. I feel like if I went to Sweden tomorrow, I'd be able to be like, hey, still working on the pronunciation. You get the point. I mean, they make sure that you get good fast and in a way that's not that intimidating. They have 10 to 15 minute short, fun lessons that'll have you speaking in as little as 3 weeks. These are lessons built by real people, not just like AI computer generated things. These are like actual people that know the language that are like, this is how you should learn it. And they got all these different ways you can learn. They got podcasts, games, live classes, all part of your subscription. Not to mention, it works. University studies have shown that 15 hours of Babble is the same as a semester of college Spanish. Start speaking a new language with Babble in 3 weeks by clicking the link in the description and getting 65% off. 2018 was an insane year for superhero films because we seemed to be in a spot where nobody really knew what these movies were supposed to be, and they were everywhere. On one hand, you had Infinity War, which pretty much introduced a new genre itself. It felt like the 8th episode of a TV show structurally. The kind of movie where you gotta watch like 10 movies to understand that movie. And then you had Black Panther, a superhero film that was extremely well received to a point where it got a bunch of Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. There was Aquaman, DC's summer smash that seemed to be the only superhero film that understood what superhero movies should be like. There's Spider-Verse, which took the comic book style and transformed it into something really beautiful, winning Best Animated Feature. And then there was Deadpool 2, one of the worst examples of modern superhero films in my opinion, one that just screams that we ran out of ideas so we're just gonna make fun of ourselves. And in the middle of all of this, there's Venom, which seems like both a return to campy early 2000s superhero films and also an amalgamation of everything that makes modern superhero films so exhausting. It kind of works. I'm not gonna lie. The film is about some symbiotic. It's about this alien thing that comes to Earth, and an evil scientist named Carlton Drake discovers it and starts doing tests on it and researching it to discover new places. But in the process of researching it, begins to do tests on people because the thing like enters people. That's how it feeds or something. And obviously, people die in the process. Things are not supposed to be entering other people like that. We spend a lot of time trying to explain the science behind these things, which in my opinion is the film's greatest fault. Sure, there's something interesting about an evil scientist played by Riz Ahmed, but they're not as interesting as Eddie. I mean, they get comedian Jenny Slate to play the assistant scientist or something, and they make her such a serious character. Now, to be fair, if they made her play some comic relief character, I think that would have been a lot worse. One of my biggest pet peeves in modern film is when they take a comedian and are like, do the funny thing you always do, instead of actually writing a character for them. They don't do that here, but I'm only saying all of this to let you know that all of this makes the film feel like you should be taking it kind of seriously. To spend all this time on backstory, like Iron Man 2008 levels of backstory, it really makes you think what this film was trying to do. And 20 minutes in, I think the film's pretty damn boring. But then we meet Eddie Brock, played by Tom Hardy. Eddie Brock is not like other superhero protagonists. He's a loser in like the least attractive way. He's not charming. He's extremely stupid, but he's so confident. There's close to no redeemable qualities about this man. But somehow he's kind of fun to watch. As many people have pointed out, it basically boils down to he is not a real person. Nobody is like this. I would argue Tom Hardy is actually a phenomenal actor in this movie because he invented a new guy entirely. One that doesn't fit any specific personality other than I'm weird. And what's funny about Venom is that instead of being like a normal superhero film where it's like a normal person is somehow thrown into this crazy life with weird different powers, Venom's like, this is about a weird guy getting even weirder, which is unheard of if I'm being honest. It's strange, it's gross, it does not make any sense. This movie's hilarious. I know a big question a lot of people talk about when they mention something like Venom or The Room or I guess House of Gucci as a recent example. Was it trying to be funny? And with Venom, I really can't say. I think what turns a lot of people off from this movie and make them feel like they have to laugh at it and not with it is that it's not like a lot of other superhero films where the jokes are extremely predictable. Every time Marvel wants to be funny, they have to bring everything to a grinding halt and let that joke have its own platform. And it just ruins the pace of everything. And they do it so often where it's like these jokes are written in such a specific way that kind of works for audiences, so they have no interest in changing them, and it just, you can feel a joke coming in those films. But with Venom, you don't know when it's gonna hit. It is so committed to itself that is so refreshing to watch. If Thor had an uncomfortable interaction with his neighbor or something, the way Eddie has in this film, there'd be a weird line like, you don't see that on the news. But Venom kind of leans into it. Maybe some of those scenes aren't supposed to be funny, but at least they commit. Where I find this film really comes alive is in its entire visual package. I'm talking cinematography, I'm talking CGI, I'm talking terrible clothes. The whole thing is hideous in a way that pops. I feel like now's a good time to say this film was shot by Matthew Libatique in 2:39 anamorphic widescreen aspect ratio. If you don't recognize the name, he's a very talented DP that shot Black Swan, Requiem for a Dream, Iron Man, A Star is Born, and now Venom. It doesn't feel like it starts to pop until Venom fully enters Tom Hardy's body. But once he's in there, we're off. The VFX too. I think they look really weird. They don't have the same sleek, gray prestige that most of the modern Marvel films have. They're messy, they're gross, they're clunky, but at least they kind of catch your eye, you know? I love the fact that the film had a thing it set out to do, and it did it. This film is slimy. Once again, it commits. Maybe not to something great or appealing, but it commits. Now, to be fair, before I get too ahead of myself, the movie commits when it feels like it. I'm gonna once again admit that the film is tonally inconsistent as far as that first act and last two acts go, but I think the thing that wins me over with this film, yes, film, not movie, is that at least I can talk about it like a 3-act structure, you know? With most superhero films, I feel like I didn't do the homework or something, or that I'm like watching something that exists on a much bigger scale that I'm all of a sudden obligated to participate in. And to be fair, Venom does have a sequel that I'm going to talk about. It also has end credit scenes and all that jazz. But I'm speaking on behalf of the first movie alone when I say it feels like its own thing. It feels like I'm watching a movie. Just one movie with a bunch of flaws and memorable scenes and weird characters, rather than a piece of something else where I don't get to see the full arc until the next, like, 3 films. And I like that about Venom. I like that it exists in its own little universe and that it's probably going to end up being one of the more memorable superhero films I think about. Basically, I can't wait to tell my grandkids about this one. For anyone living under a rock, Venom 2 came out this year, and it's called Let There Be Carnage. This one's about Edward still hanging out with Venom. This time they're kind of getting on each other's nerves. In typical Tom and Greg fashion, the boys are fighting. One thing leads to another, Venom moves out, and all of a sudden Eddie has to figure his shit out. This time he's got to deal with a guy named Cletus. That's his name, played by Woody Harrelson, who is a serial killer who's been hiding bodies. All of this is unimportant, but eventually Cletus asks Eddie Brock to meet him or something. They meet. Venom makes him mad. He bites Cletus. Cletus gets blood in his finger, which lets the symbiote into Cletus, which leads to Carnage, a big blood red version of Venom. And when Carnage escapes prison, Venom and Eddie have to settle their differences to save the world. Let There Be Carnage is, unsurprisingly, a very different film from the first one. I think it was bound to be. After the negative reactions of that first movie were felt pretty universally, the film was by no means a failure. Everybody still enjoyed themselves fans and saw it. It had a massive box office, but no one took it seriously, which who's to say how seriously it was meant to be taken, but Venom 2 was written like it knows that. Venom 2 leans way more into Venom and Eddie being a couple. It feels a lot grosser with its VFX. It spits out a lot more jokes. It feels a lot more self-aware, and it's short as hell. Now, that's a lot to take in. And when you take all these into consideration, it's kind of tough to determine whether or not this is better than the first one. So let's start with the romance. This film goes full rom-com with Eddie and Venom. They're doing it on a pretty consistent basis, and it's great. It's honestly, and I mean this unironically, it's a much better route to take this whole inner battle thing than the first film. Because the first film really tries to do something with that inner duality theme where it's like, I'm battling myself. But Venom 2 kind of throws that out the window and instead replaces it with this rom-com action thing where it treats Venom like an actual character who's separate from Eddie and not just an extension of him. Now, yes, that comes with a lot of pros, like I just mentioned, but it also comes with Venom as a character. Venom is not that funny on his own. The whole thing about the world not taking the first one seriously but still having fun with it meant obviously that they were gonna ham up the humor in this one. And boy do they try really hard to be funny. There's just a lot more jokes between Eddie and Venom. There's a lot of slapstick stuff with like Tom Hardy getting the ketchup sprayed on him. It really does confirm that maybe we were laughing at that first film, because if this is them trying to be funny, it's not that funny. But that's not to say the movie isn't funny, because boy oh boy, we're blessed with Woody Harrelson. You don't even need to see the thing to understand he's the best part about this movie. All you need is this promotional still. He goes full... I don't even know what he goes, but it's not good. It's sort of Joker, but it's also sort of just typical serial killer guy. But Woody is not the kind of guy that works in this role. I mean, sure, he looks a little weird, but he's a nice guy. There's not a single moment in this film where he feels threatening, and that really doesn't go well with the carnage thing. I know a lot of people's complaints with both these films are that it should be rated R and that they both hold back a lot, and I don't disagree, but I would take it a step further and say they should be horror movies. Venom is so clearly such an amazing Halloween horror character, not some action star. And I know action kind of has to be associated with comic book films, but I feel like a Halloween horror film starring Venom would be super entertaining and unique. It'd at least give Carnage some sort of direction, because I think all of my issues with tone are, if anything, worse here than they were in the first one. Yes, Eddie and Venom have this rom-com thing going. They figured that out, but that's only like 30% of the movie. Sure, 30% is a stretch, but it's certainly not enough to make the whole film feel like it has its tone down. The other percent is honestly spent with a lot of background stuff that's trying to build up to this third act, stuff that nobody cares about. This screaming girl is not interesting, and it builds up to what? The action in the film is super generic. It feels like something I'd see in Stranger Things. It feels big and loud and fast, but not like something that I'd see in a Venom movie, you know? It just feels like another comic book film that's a little freaky. Maybe this is controversial to say, but at least the first Venom had its own world going for it. When I think of Venom, I think of dark blue, I think of the city, cold, messy, Tom Hardy just completely destroying everyone and everything around him. It smells awful, that movie. Carnage doesn't smell like anything, which does not help when the film is just a tight hour and 20 minutes. By the end of it, you don't even feel like you watched anything at all. It feels like you speed ran a film and just got the basic essentials. What does it say when the most memorable part of the film are the end credits, which I won't spoil for anyone who hasn't seen it, but I think to summarize my thoughts on this whole experience, I came away from these movies really liking Venom, the character, as well as Eddie Brock. I think in the current state of movies, specifically superhero movies, they come off as two genuinely silly characters that deserve the goofs that come with them. They should be treated like comedic characters, because look at them. But unfortunately, because neither of these films seem to be able to commit in full, they just come off like superhero movies that are really dumb, which they would be regardless. This is Venom we're talking about, but it would be a fun dumb, you know? Really, it just boils down to wasted potential, but what you gonna do? So I think that's what I have to say about Venom. I'm glad I was able to finally contribute my valuable thoughts on these films. I cannot wait to see what shenanigans this fella gets into next. So yeah, thanks for watching. Go watch both Venom movies and form your own opinion, and I'll see you all in the next one.